Good morning on this Sunday, August 27th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Former President Donald Trump and 18 others turned themselves into the Fulton County Jail and posed for mugshots. Also, Governor Kemp shows up at the GOP debate, criticizing former President Trump for being a no-show. And the Cobb County school system bans 2 books for inappropriate content. Melita, Phil, and Theron are all here. Brian Robinson is filling in for Janelle. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
What has taken place here is a travesty of justice. We did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. And everybody knows it. I've never had such support. And that goes with the other ones, too. What they're doing is election interference. They're trying to interfere with an election. There's never been anything like it in our country before. This is their way of campaigning.
That's, of course, former President Donald Trump just after he surrendered at the Fulton County Jail. We're going to get right to it. Let's run the table. Brian, to you first, because Trump also said that we have every right to challenge an election that we think is dishonest.
He does, and this is going to be at the heart of his defense, that he was practicing his First Amendment rights, and that's all that this was. We can have a debate about the appropriateness of him being on that phone call with Brad Raffensperger. We can talk about the appropriateness of a lot of what happened, not saying anything during the January 6 riots, for example. But the question becomes, is it illegal? There's a difference between something that is bad behavior and illegal behavior, something that Vivek Ramaswamy even said this week on the debate, during a debate where he was very defensive of Trump's actions. So that is the separation here. I think that kind of gets to the heart of the problem with this case. It was a gray area legally, and I don't think Fulton County taxpayers should be footing the bill for this overreach.
Theron, let's talk about all these mugshots we saw all week long, especially the former president's. He obviously looked defiant in that mugshot and probably had this planned out on how he would pose.
Well, there's a few people that I know had a plan. Let's start with Sheriff Patrick Labatt, who I want to start by really sort of complimenting on this show, and not just him. I mean, he went right away and thanked the men and women in law enforcement, the coordination that it took to safely and securely and really swiftly get the president from the world's busiest airport to the Fulton County Jail on Wright Street, and I think it took less than 20 minutes to process him. So I think that you have to really look at the process. While the mugshot did happen, the sheriff and the Fulton County officials did a good job. The thing that's really striking to me, Laura, is that you really sit back in this, and I know Dick Williams, is probably just, if he was here, he would probably think this is something he never would think we would be talking about on Georgia Gang, that a former president was actually mugshot and had to surrender to authority. He actually has an inmate number. But Donald Trump has this unique ability. It's very uncanny, and it's quite disturbing to really normalize the abnormal. What do I mean by that? Meaning that this is so abnormal, but to his supporters, this has sort of been normalized a little bit, because he has desensitized a lot of us in American politics to think that this type of behavior is just something we should expect now. So again, the mugshot is there. I want to compliment the sheriff for sticking with his word, doing his job. It was in the statute. He produced a mugshot, and ultimately we got to just move on from it.
Phil, from a Republican perspective, seeing all of these folks processed, seeing all of these mugshots, clearly it's firing up the base, but what do you think this is doing to the independents?
Well, the polls are showing that another indictment, the 4th one now, his poll numbers are doing far better. You talk about normal, the hard left and the deep state is responsible for this. 4 indictments in 4 different left-leaning areas. The left and the deep state is on a temper tantrum against Donald Trump. This is all it is. It's election interference. It's sad that we have to have this in Fulton County. I agree, Brian, with you. It's a waste of money, and the backlog of criminal cases continues to grow. You can't get a speedy trial in Fulton County. You got murderers that's going to take another year or two. But aside from all that, and by the way, that was a great death stare. He was looking at the deep state and the rhinos and the hard left. I think he practiced that. I think he practiced it well. That's one of the best pictures I've seen of him. But I think in the end, I'm worried, as I've said on the show before, this is protected speech, and this RICO is an overreach. Alan Dershowitz, the legendary Democratic lawyer, said, I was on the Gore campaign in 2000. We did the same thing that the Trump campaign did. We were calling secretaries of state. We were questioning everything. We were making inflammatory statements. We did everything Trump and his people did. And it's an outrage. It's a dark day in American history.
Melita, your thoughts?
Well, there's an old saying, power corrupts absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so what we have now is the president and those around him, the former president, being accused of going to extraordinary and illegal means to preserve their power. And what is historic is the wide range of activities alleged in both the Fulton County indictment and the other jurisdictions. This is not politicalization of the Justice Department. It is instead charges arising from 4 different grand juries of citizens who believe that those clinging to power violated the law and should be brought to trial. First Amendment never protects criminal behavior.
Well, we'll find out, right? Because Phil, the former president, hired one of the best defense attorneys in Georgia, I think in the United States, Steve Sadow. I'm dating myself, but I remember watching him in the Gold Club trial. I remember the Ray Lewis trial. I mean, he is one of the best. And how does this affect the case?
Well, you're making a good point. He is one of the best when it comes to trial attorneys in Georgia and probably in the Southeast. He's an expert in RICO, and I think that's why he was brought on. He's one of the few, I think, trial attorneys in Georgia that's an expert on this. And so I think that you're going to be seeing a shift from Fulton County, I hope so, to the federal level, and that's where Steve Sadow would come in too. In fact, it may be breaking as we tape on Friday that there's going to be some decisions. Do we move this into a federal court, which is better than Fulton County because that's a larger area in Georgia, and you might have some Trump sympathizers. You might have that one person that could hang up a jury if it ever goes that far.
Well, Theron, there's a lot of legal issues cropping up, right? So one of the defendants requested a speedy trial, and Fani Willis said, okay, how about October? Then there's Mark Meadows, who wants his case moved to federal court, and we assume some others will also. But how will this affect the case, the timing?
Well, to Phil's point really quick, I think Donald Trump changes his defense team as much as he changes his socks. I mean, it's in every sort of state that he's been in that he'll start with one person and then he'll go with another person. I think he had Drew Finley first, and now he's got this gentleman, Steve Sadow. But what I have heard from legal experts, and just based on Fani Willis's prosecutorial sort of history and her being able to prosecute tough cases, is that she would have never brought this up if she wasn't prepared. So I think her and her team anticipated there were going to be a request for a speedy trial. But what the speedy trial request does now is it now sort of speeds up the Trump defense deadline, and now you're going to have people who are going to, one person's going to stand trial, because I think it's only that person who's been granted that request. So the question is, Lori, will more people ask for a speedy trial? And then if that happens, will more people plead guilty? And then do they turn into state witnesses against the former president? And so I think that she's ready, and I think that based on her history, and you look at, she prosecuted one of the longest trials that we've ever seen in the state of Georgia when she was a district attorney at Fulton County, so I think they're prepared.
Well, that's interesting, because I heard if one requests it, they all get a speedy trial. So there's
that's
just
right.
a lot of...
And I think the judge indicated that.
But then some go to federal court.
That's right. And if you get separated, look at the Young Thug trial, that'll just delay things more. I think the experts are saying that this will go beyond Election Day 2024.
Yeah.
Well, the judge's order specified that only the man who requested the speedy trial had his trial date set for October. So what you really have is 19 different people listening to 19 different sets of attorneys who have 19 different philosophies about what best is the outcome for their client.
And now here comes Washington, because Brian, House Republican Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan starting an inquiry into Fulton County DA Fani Willis, wanting to see if she communicated with the feds regarding her investigation. What's this all about, and what can come out of it?
This is a surprise to no one who's ever watched a football practice. If the defense throws a punch, the offense is going to throw a punch, and all of a sudden we've got chaos. And that is what is breaking out here. This was so predictable. And I believe that we even discussed this a little bit last week. We have opened up a Pandora's box where we are going to politicize prosecution going forward. In my opinion, the House Oversight Committee has no need to be looking at a Fulton County DA. I think this whole thing is ridiculous, but it's been caused by a series of ridiculousness. And we are investigating each other on everything, and for a time, until somebody lays down their arms, this is going to go on and on and on. And where we are spending all our time talking about court cases instead of talking about how do we deal with a $30 trillion debt? How do we meet the challenge of China. That's what America needs to be thinking about and talking about. Instead, we're having this circus. It's ridiculous, and it's going to kill us.
Well, Melita, Rudy Giuliani also did not hold back his words. Brian he said Fani Willis will go down in American history as having conducted one of the worst attacks on the American Constitution ever when this case is dismissed. Your thoughts?
Well, that's about the only defense he has, is to attack her. And it's interesting that you see politicians attacking Fani Willis for, quote, going after headlines when they themselves are going after headlines with their attacks. And it's sad to see the descent of Rudy Giuliani from America's mayor to the current caricature of his former self.
Phil.
Well, I think that what Chairman Jim Jordan of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee is trying to do is to show the collusion with Jack Smith, the left-wing prosecutor that's doing the federal case. And I think, in my opinion, they've been clearly coordinating. Anytime there's new allegations about bribery or money being put in secret bank accounts with Hunter Biden, the president's son, all of a sudden there's news from Fani Willis. And you know what's interesting to me? We talk about the 2020 election all the time and election interference. There are tweets by Fani Willis herself. I'm going to publish some on James Magazine Online that she questioned the Fulton County election. She called it a mess in her tweets. Another hypocrite, Fani Willis.
All right, I got to leave it there, folks. Up next, Governor Brian Kemp heads to Milwaukee, calling the Trump campaign a loser for not showing up at the debate.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
And Kemp surprised a lot of folks when he showed up in Milwaukee this week to comment on the GOP debate. Theron, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that he basically called former President Trump a loser for skipping the debate.
I was a little surprised because this is the farthest that the governor has gone. And Brian mentioned something, I know Phil mentioned this too, is that I got to start listening to this podcast because apparently the governor, and I did watch Brian on live TV all week this week on Fox 5, but he just let go. And I think he said what a lot of Republicans believe, Lori. But the question is that who's going to join him in this fight? And so it made news prior to the president coming to town. But also, I think the governor is trying to do. He's saying, look, let's focus on winning. Like, let's try to put together a strategy. And unfortunately, there's not enough voices like Brian Kemp to speak out against Donald Trump's behavior. And what he really was saying is, hey, if you believe everything you believe, show up to the debate. But we know that Donald Trump was not going to show up at the debate because he's ahead in the polls. And then two, quite, effectively utilize him surrendering himself to a jail to be fingerprint and mugshot to then turn into a national press. So now the only unfortunate thing now is that we're not going to be talking about what Brian Kemp said unless he goes back on this podcast again and say something a little more, harsh about the former president.
Well, Brian, you're one of the Republicans who has spoken harshly about the former president. We also saw, though, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene up in Milwaukee making the rounds had a much different message than than Brian Kemp's message.
He did. We keep talking about Brian Kemp as a break glass in case of emergency candidate. We keep hearing that phrase. But when people on the stage said the kind of things that Brian Kemp said on the Ruthless podcast, they got booed. When Chris Christie said those things, when some of the other candidates pushed back on some of Trump's behavior in the past, there were notable boos. And that's going to be something that anybody who breaks glass and enters this field is going to face. There is a hardcore MAGA base within the party that's going to be extraordinarily difficult to overcome. But Brian Kemp, what he has obviously chosen is to just be an important national voice in the party on the sidelines of this race. He's not going to get in it, but he showed us by going to Milwaukee, this is somebody who doesn't leave Georgia unless he has a purpose, right? He loves being home. So the fact that he went there shows he is going to be a player in this race moving forward. And look, if Donald Trump is our nominee, he's going to get in line and he's going to pull the rope to pull the Republican nominee over the line. He's going to be a team player.
That'll be interesting to see. Melita, real quickly, I want to move on, but go ahead.
Well, Governor Kemp predicted that everyone on the stage had a chance to catch lightning in a bottle. And my friends were more like, that was a barf bag worthy debate. And the bottles were filled with alcoholic beverages being quickly consumed.
Well, I wanted to move on.
Typical
but
Democratic reaction. Typical Democratic
Phil,
reaction.
I
But
gotta
it was
give you-
witty, though. Let me just say this.
I thought it was interesting.
Free consulting advice to Governor Kemp. If you want to run against John Ossoff and beat him, and if you want to get all the Republicans united, you might want to tone down, because to the point of Brian, you probably got about 35 to 40% of a MAGA base in Georgia, and you don't want to really hack them off.
I will say, if anybody can thread that needle, it is Brian Kemp.
He's done it before.
He's done it before in an epic, historic fashion.
Yeah, and it's because of the left-wing candidate that he faces.
But John Ossoff is different, to your point.
Not
than
in the
Stacey
primaries.
Abrams. John Ossoff
He'd
will be different than Stacey
Well,
Abrams.
we're going to be talking about that
Beat Purdue by
years.
50 points.
That's
in
a
the
long
primary.
way off. So let's go closer to home, because Cobb County has pulled 2 books from its school libraries. School officials emailed parents saying that the content is highly inappropriate and sexually explicit. Melita, I want to come back to you because you're really good on these types of issues.
Well, one of those books that they've banned is about a teenage boy discovering that he's gay at camp, summer camp. The other one has some mention of sex and some graphic language because it's about 2 young boys befriending a girl with cancer. And frankly, most of the adults I know who've experienced friends experiencing cancer use a lot of expletives, just like that book. And so both of these books have received awards, so it's very interesting that Cobb County is taking this step.
Phil?
Well, there's a lot of garbage that's received awards from groups, so that doesn't mean a thing. And also, school boards have a right to look at what the children, the students are looking at. So they're doing the right thing. You glossed that over very well. I have to compliment you. I can't even say some of the things that basically they're talking about. Anyhow, I'm glad the school board did it. They have to. You have to. It's just like an editor of a publication. Some things go in, some things are inappropriate.
Well, a federal judge has blocked part of a new Georgia law that bans most gender-affirming surgeries and hormone replacement therapies for transgender people under the age of 18. In a ruling obtained by Fox 5, the federal judge blocked the state from enforcing a ban on doctors prescribing hormone therapy to minors. Brian.
This eventually is going to be cleared. This is going to go to the appeals court, which is got a conservative tilt to it. I would say a pragmatic tilt to it. This is well within the rights of a state government to decide what procedures can be done on children. And it is so indicative of the results of what's happened with the left moving way too fast on this issue. When I was growing up, I'm not that old, I'm a Gen Xer. We had never heard of this. This is a completely new thing, and society's told we have to embrace it all immediately, or we're hurting children. We don't have any research on the long-term impacts of these things. And look, I am open to looking at that research. Tell me what happens to these kids as time moves on. Because at the end of the day, what I want, I think what most Georgians want, is what's best for children in the long run. But children are treated differently than adults in our society, and protecting them from something that we don't know how this plays out in 10, 20 years, I think that's good state government for now.
Theron?
Well, the one thing that Republicans like to talk about a lot is that when a law comes up, where it's a state law, local law, it violates the Constitution, it violates a certain amendment. Well, in this case, this U.S. judge came back and said it violates the 14th Amendment. So let's not gloss that over. And so while, there can be a robust debate from us on the panel about how we decide to do parenting, but the fundamental right here is that does this violate the 14th Amendment? And I've said this before, I think that decisions with these children should be left up to their doctors and their parents in the household. Now, Brian is right. I'm around the same age, and it's not something that we grew up knowing. But newsflash, Brian, we do have kids who are being raised by 2 men, 2 women in 2023, and that's kind of where we are. And then you have to sort of think, okay, if a child decides to make this decision, it is the parent's responsibility to have that conversation with them. And so whether we disagree with it or not, as far as parenting, the thing is it lawful? Can it actually hold up in court? And that's what we got to wait and see.
Okay. Up next, opponents of the Atlanta Police Training Facility are questioning how the city will verify signatures on their petition to try to get the issue on the ballot.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
After announcing a plan to turn in more than 100,000 signatures Monday in an effort to put Atlanta's controversial public safety training center on the ballot, opponents now say they will hold off on turning over their petition. They say they don't like the way the city plans to go about verifying the signatures. Melita.
So the city has not been precisely clear about how they will verify signatures. And the grassroots groups and some political leaders, including Congresswoman Nikema Williams, have called for a transparent process which allows for the curing of signatures and allows for people who've signed the petition who might be rejected for some reason to come back and fix that. And the city hasn't reacted in a way that gives them the assurance this will happen. So this is another example, I think, of a lack of clarity causing confusion and greater resentment.
Brian, is it a lack of clarity here?
Look, the signature verification process is a bit subjective. That part's true, but it is the system. This is what the law calls for. There's no easier way to do it. There's no foolproof way to do it. I guess we got people show up at City Hall and show their ID. Is that what they want? That would be quite the logistical hurdle to get over. Like, this is the system. You can either pull it off or not. But these folks obviously have resources. They obviously have money to be able to afford to live in a tent out in the trees the way that so many of them have. They obviously have got, daddy back in Maine and Washington State,
right.
wiring the money in. So
that's right.
Right?
You're right.
You got to admit, they have collected more signatures than any mayor in recent history has received votes to be elected.
I love it because the Republicans were questioning signature matches, and then they were called, all sorts of names, and yet, wow, now you got to do signature matches and question an election. That you better be careful, Fonnie better not hear this.
Well, real quick, the city clerk's office did come out and say, look, this will be a transparent process as much as possible. The city has obtained an outside law firm to look at the legality of these signatures. They also brought back Forrest Webb, who was a well-respected clerk who retired. So I think to Melita's point, you will probably hear this week from the city more clarity about the system and how it goes forward. But no, you can't overshadow that. They did get 104,000 signatures, and that's real. So I think
we don't know if
we don't know where they're from.
But they only need 60 or 70,000. Yeah. So they intentionally went over. I mean, we all know this. We do campaigns. You go over knowing that some will not match and some will be thrown out.
All right. Yeah. Well, this week, among an increase in COVID cases, Morris Brown College is instituting a mask mandate for students and employees. I think we all hate to see the return of these masks, but Theron, do you think this is necessary?
I went to Clark Atlanta University, and I'm on the board of trustees there, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Morris Brown. I mean, we're AUC United. It's a consortium of HBCUs, only in the country. So I think that we have to really base the decision from this new president at a time where students are coming back. Morris Brown is now celebrating that they're fully accredited, that students are there and everything. So I think for them to take this proactive measure, there had to be something maybe in the data that showed that if you did not take this step, maybe the numbers will go up. And so, look, I'm just going to say it. I don't want to go back, right? And I don't want to go back to being shut down. And absolutely. I think, but I do think that we all need to make sure that we understand that the numbers are going up.
But they go up, I will say, because as a kid, we have kids in school, we know they go up this time of year. All the kids are back in school, everybody's sharing germs.
But let's not mandate it. That's the key. I think the fact that we've had more freedom of expression, since Dr. Fauci is gone, and now we had the medical community finally having the discussion they should have had in 2020 and 2021. No mandates. We don't want lockdowns. We saw how it damaged our children, especially in schools. We're still trying to recover from that. If you want to wear a mask, go ahead.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks.
Absolutely.
Winners and losers next.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Bill, we'll start with you this week.
Believe it or not, I'm going to praise some Democrats. Actually, we know that Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones was targeted by DA Fonnie Willis because he was an alternate elector for 2020. That was thrown out by a judge and said, no, wait a minute, it was a conflict of interest, but there may be another prosecution. But there was 3 or 4 Democrats in the state Senate that took abuse, but they said, you know what, we work well with the Lieutenant Governor and we wish him well and all of that. Another winner, I have to say, is Congressman Rich McCormick. There's some folks out there, and this is a tip for our viewers. A lot of people have trouble getting their passports renewed. He will do it in record time.
Oh, good to know. Theron.
All right, real quick, Alex Urban at the Tour Championship, East Lake, so y'all go out and check it out. Also want to make Anna Roach at the Atlanta Region Commission. I was a part of a link trip that actually went to Montreal to learn about infrastructure and EV and affordable housing. That was a really good trip. And I know we were going to talk about this, Lori, so I wanted to say this. I want to say his name. The State Patrol Officer, Jacob Hollingsworth, and then Seth Thomas, and then Jordan Ennis, who is the guy who actually caught the guy who was doing the street racing. Definitely want to make him a winner. But Seth and Jacob was talking about him in the Four Seasons when I was there for the pro. So I told him I was going to mention your name.
It's
But
an
shout
awesome
out
video.
to Jordan Ennis for doing your job and getting that guy off the street.
Awesome video. He's definitely a big winner. Brian.
You know, my loser are the poor folks who had to go in and get mugshotted. No matter how you feel about this whole issue, a lot of those folks have had their lives put through the ringer and have been financially ruined by this. My winners, the Tour Championship there, and got to have breakfast with Roy McIlroy and John Rahm this week.
Nice.
Yes.
Don't forget Tony Finau.
And Tony Finau, a great American. And Friday was Governor Dill's 81st birthday. Team Dill was able to get together and celebrate him, so he's one of my winners. And lastly, middle-aged white people who had Yacht Rock Review at Chastain this weekend, a great annual tradition.
Or Chris Stapleton.
Shout out to the middle-aged.
Happy birthday to Governor Deal. Melita, we
My
got
winner
10
of
seconds.
the week is well-respected television judge Glenda Hatchett, who courageously spoke out and pressed charges last year when a sheriff groped her.
And won. Okay, thanks everybody. See you next week.